listening to the Astral Hour. I'm your host, AstralMeadow. Join me as we take a glimpse into the mysterious. Welcome, everyone. I'm joined today once again with my husband, Justin, and we'll be recording part 2 of this deep dive into the 7 bodies, or the human constitution, and the astral plane. For this episode, we will be exploring the scenery and inhabitants of the astral plane, and mostly referring to Charles W Leadbeater's book, The Astral Plane, which can be found for free in PDF form, and there's also a free audio version of it on YouTube that has some pretty cool pictures to go along with, which helps me when I am reading really complex books. So feel free to follow along. I'll read that book and then come back and listen to us talk about it. So welcome to the show, Justin.
Thank you very much. Happy to be back for this second part on this series. This is a topic that I find super fascinating, and I've always been into the astral plane and the astral fields per se. And so, I always connected with your name, AstralMeadow, as soon as you chose it, because it's always been a subject that's resonated with me. So I'm happy to be here talking about it.
Yeah, me too. It's something that's just really a part of, I feel like, who I am and what I'm supposed to explore in this lifetime and kind of master, specifically with Mars being conjunct my rising, and Mars rules the astral body. Mm-hmm. And since it's in the first house of self, I feel like there's so much going on there that I'm supposed to discover and then share what I've learned with others. So, yeah. All right. So I'm going to start just giving kind of a background on what the astral plane is, and then we will dive even deeper into this as we go. So the astral plane is the bridge between the physical and the higher spiritual realms. This is a plane of thought forms where emotions and desires are molded into shape. It is sometimes called the emotional plane for this reason. This is the plane of the emotional or astral body, where the ego experiences dreams and where we go for a time after death. It can be interpreted as a mirror into the inner world of individuals, a place where their inner thoughts and feelings become an actual real and tangible form. Students of theosophy believe the astral plane is influenced by the collective consciousness of all humanity and is thus very fluid and ever-changing. This ties into Carl Jung's theory on the collective unconscious. There are different levels to the astral plane called subplanes that correspond to different aspects of consciousness. These different levels span from the chaotic lower levels with the elemental beings all the way up to the higher levels of more enlightened spiritual beings. The astral plane is seen as a realm of soul growth and learning where a person can encounter experiences and levels that can ultimately further their spiritual evolution. And if you go back to our episode where me and Philip discussed Barbara Handcloud's work, the astral plane also corresponds with the 4th dimension, right? Which makes sense if you think about the astral sight allows you to peer into all the sides of a thing, seeing its inner and outer reflections simultaneously. So you literally see things from a 4th dimensional perspective. So it makes sense that it corresponds with the 4th dimension in her book as well. All right. In Sanskrit, the astral plane is called Kamaloka, which translates to desire plane. Although some people have noted that this is just a subsection of the astral and it extends beyond this viewpoint, which I would agree with. But I just wanted to clarify that since it is very much overlaps with the Hindu concept of Kamaloka. The definition of Kamaloka is the semi-material plane, kama, which we learned in the last episode means desire. This is to us subjective and invisible, and it's where the disembodied personalities or the astral forms, which we call the kamarupas, remain until they fade from complete exhaustion of the effects of the mental impulses of animal impulses and desires. So this kama loka realm precedes Devachan or Avicii, which is where the more wicked beings would go after this phase.
Okay. So this is the first realm that you enter whenever you pass away?
Yes, you're going to go into the astral plane. And when we talk about the forms there, we'll kind of discuss how we're sort of slowly disintegrating in this realm. So when we die, our physical body dies, and then we cross over. But the physical body is still there. It just doesn't have a life force. The soul's no longer in it, but it still exists there, right? You could still draw its blood and read its DNA, and you see things like the body still like having electrical like movements and things, even though the person is no longer in the body.
Right.
And so I feel like there's this sort of delayed response with our astral body still has somewhat of a life force there, and it's slowly going to disintegrate over time. And then that being's going to cross over into Devachan. So the reason that I felt called to start this series going into the 7 bodies is because it's really important and helpful to know how we're able to access these different planes, which we're able to through the fact that we have these different bodies within us. So when we're in the astral plane, we are going there and projecting our astral form there, right? And we go there when we're asleep, and some people can go there with their eyes open, and they are trained and consciously projecting themselves there.
Well, I think another reason that this is really important, kind of like we were discussing yesterday or last night, if this is the blueprint for what happens whenever you die, then I think it's important. You come across so many examples of people that don't realize that they've died, or that they don't know what's happening, and they get stuck in some of these levels. And so if you're completely unaware of what's happening to you, you have much less chance to progress through or to get to a happier state. But if you do know, if you've been initiated and you've studied some of this stuff and you are more prepared for the journey after death, then you're able to navigate it much clearer in a conscious way and able to get to those higher, happier places much quicker. And I find that to be incredibly valuable, because I would hate to get stuck in a lower astral realm after death because I didn't know what was happening, or I was believing the wrong thing. And so I find this information incredibly valuable for the journey that occurs later after life.
Yes. So in the book, Leadbeater, you can kind of tell that he's speaking from a kind of a frustrated perspective of that we have these religions and they're supposed to be preparing us, for life after death. And they're absolutely not preparing these people. And so they're showing up in the astral plane or in Kamaloka, and they're like traumatized because they are thinking that they're going to go straight into heaven.
Yeah.
And also, if you're not teaching people about the fact that all of these desires and addictions and these impulses that we haven't worked through while we're in the body, they will carry over, and we still have to work through them. And so it's not like death suddenly, I think it's Yogananda, like you don't become some saint and, just get wings just by dying. Right. It's not, you don't go immediately into a higher state unless you have done the work while you were in the physical body and you've already released a lot of those attachments. These initiates or adepts are going to spend a lot less time in this in-between plane because they're not going to have like an affinity for it. It's not going to be of resonance with them because they've already done a lot of this work. They've already been in and out of the astral plane, and like they understand the scenery. They know what they might encounter.
Yeah.
And so for them, it's sort of just like maybe they're just like in a sleepy kind of, unconscious state while they're passing through this until they get to the devachanic plane, which is more of the bliss, and that's going to be the more heavenly realm that the church and the religions teach us about, kind of skipping this. Now, the Catholic Church, there are religions that go into this purgatory realm,
Right.
which is going to feel a lot more like the astral plane.
But I think even still, it's more depicted as something different than
Right.
what is being described with Leadbeater in the astral plane, because it seems to me, as we get into it, we'll talk about it, but it's so similar in a lot of ways to the world that we exist in now that people don't fully even grasp that they're in it.
Right.
It's not like you go to some empty gray space that's considered purgatory and you're like, oh, clearly I'm in an in-between world. You get stuck in this astral realm that you don't really quite realize is purgatory, if that's the way you want to describe it.
Right.
And so without the knowledge of what you're dealing with and without any sort of understanding of the processes, then you could get hung up there for a long time.
Great. Which we'll get into more later about the occurrences that might cause you to have a longer stay.
Yeah.
So, all right. So I'm going to read a quote from Leadbeater on planes. So, in our solar system, there exist perfectly definite planes, each with its own matter of different degrees of density. Some of these planes can be visited and observed by persons who have qualified themselves for the work. So I was thinking about, how was I able to go have these astral journeys starting at the age of 4? How has this always been so accessible to me? Well, now that I'm, in the Akashic records and asking about past lives, and, I've been an initiate in many lifetimes. And I think it was more natural for me to be able to go in and out of that state. As a child, I would be in prayer and like meditation, and, I spent a lot of time in isolation and solitude, which gave me a lot of chance to slip in and out of these bliss states. And also, traumatic experiences encouraged dissociation.
Right.
And so I think for me, I just somehow was able to access it without putting a lot of effort. However, some people do want this and they kind of struggle, and it takes practice to be able to, work with that astral form in a more coherent way, like while they're awake and conscious. It just takes practice, right?
Yeah.
So he really hones in on the fact that the objects and the inhabitants on the astral plane are real. So just because they exist on a different plane, just because they don't look as physical, or they might look different, or there might be like 10 beings encompassing one spot, they're still real.
Yeah.
Okay. It's not just because imagination helps us in this realm. It doesn't mean that everything we're encountering is just a figment of our imagination.
Right.
Right. It has its own essence, its own story, its own, consciousness. So that, like we were saying earlier, this plane can be broken into 7 subplanes, which is why it's helpful to kind of know the 7 bodies, because these words are going to come back up. So I really liked this article I found from esotericguideblogspot.com. It's titled Esoteric, the 7 Divisions of the Astral Plane. I'm going to go over these with you, and you can go check this out. I'll put a link to this article because there's like some cool pictures and stuff as we go through it. But I'm just going to read their little excerpts on the different planes. The first division is the physical, objective, astral subplane. It corresponds with everything with the physical world that we know. However, in this subplane, everything seen must be inverted when translated into terms of the physical plane. It's like the mirror image inverted. Okay. So we hear that a lot. Like everything I've ever read on the astral plane is very clear that it's important to invert numbers and words and things like that, or you're going to be confused. So if it's 369, it's going to be 963.
Right.
Right. And so this is where training with a master can be helpful, because they're going to quiz you. They're going to teach you these processes, and also can go into the astral plane with you, put shields around you, and really offer a lot of guidance. And it can take away some of the fears that people might have running into some creepy looking being, and now they don't want to do it anymore.
Do you think that's why they say that you can't read numbers and words while you're dreaming? Do you think it's because it's inverted, or do you think that's a different phenomenon?
I don't know. I mean, I don't know if I've heard much of that.
Well, I always, in terms of researching lucid dreaming, one of the ways that you can help yourself realize that you're dreaming is to try to read something or to try to read a clock, and you can't focus on it. You can't actually read it. And if you're conscious of that, then it can help stimulate you in the way that you're like, oh, I'm in a dream right now. This isn't actually real.
Right. I suppose that relates to it. I have been able to read in the astral plane, but I'm doing it consciously. So it's different, because when I'm asleep in the astral plane, it's a lot foggier. I'm not, I'm resting, it's not that I'm not having visions, but not every time I go to sleep am I lucid dreaming and aware of it. A lot of times I'm just sleeping. And if I have a dream, I'll, write it down. But the most valuable information that I get from the astral plane comes in meditation, or when I'm consciously trying to have like a mystical experience, and that's my intention. And then I lay down and go into meditation, and then I'm going to be able to really digest and focus on what I'm seeing. And this is where it takes a little training, because a lot of people have these experiences, but they cannot carry them back into the physical body. That's what takes practice, right? And this is why writing them down immediately is so important, because you will lose content as you travel between these dimensions. And that's where training helps. All right. The second division is the astral subplane. It is similar to the first division, but the objects are extremely tenuous. So to speak, they are astralized. And this plane is the limit to which the average and ordinary medium can usually reach, and beyond which they cannot go. For a non-mediumistic person to reach it, he must be asleep or in a trance or under the influence of laughing gas or some drug. And also, when an individual is in a state of ordinary delirium, his consciousness usually accesses to this plane. So, not only when we're asleep, but there are substances that we can take that can also cause us to be in and out of the astral, especially in these lower divisions. So the third division, the pranic or psychic astral subplane, it is of an intensely lived nature. The lunatics are often in this state of consciousness and see the most terrible visions. And also when a person is in a state of extreme delirium, can enter into the subplane. Also when the drunks have hallucinations, known scientifically as the delirium tremens, and popularly known as they see pink elephants. But in reality, they are not delirious, but perceiving the psychic astral subplane and interpreting it in their own way. And they can even go to the next plane, since the two overlap. So not all of these planes are fun. Some of them can be very disorienting. There can be beings there that are playing tricks on us. And when we enter into these planes on substances, that substance is going to affect our vision. And so if you're drunk and you're perceiving the astral realm, it might be terrifying, and you might sound like a madman as you're seeing these things, and people are going to think, oh, this guy's delusional. Well, they actually are seeing things, but because they're entering it from such a low vibration, they are encountering the lower astral plane, and the beings that exist there are not as friendly, and they're not as beautiful, and they're not very helpful.
Yeah.
So
it makes you want to investigate into some of the crazy stories that people have undoubtedly told over the many years of, that crazy drunk guy was going on and on about so-and-so, and like he was delusional, people would say. But if you go back and investigate some of these stories, I'm sure it would tell you all sorts of wild stuff about these astral realms that are actually there and they actually are experiencing, but everyone just wrote them off as being nuts.
Right. This is where reading the Akashic Records is so nice, because I could be like, what was this person seeing? And I could figure it out, and they could take me to the subplane and explain it. So a lot of the visions that we have, if we're in doubt about what it is that we're seeing, it's so nice to go into the Akashic Records and get this clear understanding and perception. And it really helps us translate the experience in a logical way.
It also makes me think of the movie Dumbo.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
When the little mouse falls in the tub of alcohol and then starts seeing the pink elephants march around. And I never realized that was an official description of people being gassed off some substance. But I guess it totally is. And maybe lots of other people have had that experience. I don't know. I'd never really considered it as being that real.
Right. They're just thought forms that are floating around. If you think about Dumbo, I mean, there's elephants everywhere. So these people are imagining and thinking and creating elephants.
It makes sense in that context, yeah. But then to think that that's so common that it's a term, like seeing pink elephants, you're just like, what an odd thing for
so the colors,
lots of people to be seeing,
are a big thing. When you're in your astral body, the colors are going to change based on people's desires and feelings, because this is a very feeling body. So if you think about, you're working with all these elephants, you're drunk, you're seeing pink elephants everywhere. Well, you might be either seeing the thought forms of the people that are working with the elephants, or the actual elephants' astral forms. And you might see them as pink for whatever reason, because each color is associated with a feeling. Mm-hmm. So there you go.
That's interesting.
All right. So the fourth division is the comic or desire astral subplane. This is the worst and most terrible of the astral subplanes, and it is the state of consciousness that is reached in the most acute cases of delirium tremens. And from here comes the images that tempt men to incite or commit all kinds of depravity, vices, and crimes. And the individuals of a weak nature are prone to those behaviors, fall under their influence, falling into those vices, or committing these horrendous crimes. So yeah, this is interesting thinking about the guy that did the Batman thing. This was such a traumatic thing for me, because I worked at like a movie theater around that time. Where he showed up the theater. I remember like watching his trial, and he was just so like discombobulated. Like he looked really weird, and like he looked like he was on drugs.
Yeah, he did.
But he obviously wasn't. He'd been in jail for a while. But this makes me think that he might have been, influenced.
Yeah.
By whether he was on a substance, or he was just a little psychotic, already having like negative thoughts.
Right.
Slipping into this realm, and now, he's inspired to actually act upon these desires. So it's important to keep your desires pure and clean. And if you have like these lower nature desires, or these really like primitive, like let's go fight, or let's do something, that doesn't align with what my soul wants, it's important to check that, right? Shadow work is super important.
Yeah. And
working through that and saying, why am I having this desire, right? Maybe going to therapy, right? Not just getting wasted or taking drugs when you're in that negative state.
Right.
So it's even more important to stay sober when you're having those kind of thoughts.
That's true. Yeah. And you're opening yourself up to be even more influenced by the dark thoughts when you get on those substances, or you mess your mind up on something like that. Right.
So, yeah. The fifth division is the monastic or mind astral subplane. So anytime we hear manas, we think of mind. Mm-hmm. It is in this subplane that premonitions and dreams are given, and glimpses into the past and the future, as well as the reflections of the lower mind and of the objective and non-spiritual things. The mesmerized clairvoyant can reach this subplane, and if he is good enough, he can still go to the next higher subplane. So, this is, a plane I've been to many times, where I've had a vision or a vision quest, and then I have to write it down, and then I have to go into the records, right, to get the clarity. But it's really cool. So I had this meditation and I experienced this past life in such great detail. It was amazing. But because I wasn't in the records and I was just meditating, I doubted it. I'm like, did I just create this?
Right.
Right? Is this my imagination? And how would I know? Right? But I saw a full story of a past life. So then I had a record reading with my teacher. No, I didn't do this on my own at this point, which was kind of nice to have this outside perspective, someone else reading your records. And she said that this was a past life and that I was seeing it correctly and that many people come to her to try to make this clarification. And then I was able to go into even more detail about why that was the lifetime that came forward.
Yeah.
And, why it was important to me in this present moment. So this is where, we're in that meditation, we're seeing, visions, and they are making us feel certain things, right? This is our astral body still. This is a feeling body.
Yeah.
So, when you're having those meditations and you're getting those feelings all over you, like now I feel emotions, got chills, my senses are going crazy. Like that's your astral body.
Yeah.
Right. So anyways, it felt really meaningful. And so I decided to pursue it. But yeah, this is where you're going when you're able to kind of have those glimpses into the different timelines, but you don't exactly know what you're seeing.
Right.
Or if it's an imagination thing. The sixth division is the Buddhic or spiritual astral subplane. From this subplane come all the beautiful inspirations of art, poetry, music, and high types of dreams, as well as flashes of genius. And from here, we can catch reminiscences of past incarnations, although it is not possible to locate or analyze them. Okay, maybe this is actually connected to what I just said too. A lot of these planes are interpenetrating, and so sometimes it's hard to know where you are. That's where it's like it takes a trained mind to say, I'm in the 6th level,
Right.
The 7th division is known as the Atmic or auric consciousness subplane. The consciousness is in this subplane at the moment of death or in exceptional visions, remembering all the past events of your life in a flash. The memory of this consciousness must be kept in the heart, the seat of the spiritual soul, or buddhi. Then it will remain there, although impressions of this state of consciousness cannot affect the physical brain. So many people have told this story of life review, flashing before their eyes, going back into all these choices and how they could have seen it different, made a different choice, or how this choice affected this other person. So some people are able to have these near-death experiences and actually recollect this plane for us. Here are some characteristics of the astral world. Many of its inhabitants have the power to change their forms. This is interesting. I was thinking about how my friend Shane, who does all these deep dives into Sasquatch and Bigfoot, was saying, a lot. There's this theory that Bigfoot is just the fairy kingdom, and they're protecting themselves, so they're turning into this like big scary thing,
Right.
that will make people be like, "Oh God, what did I just see?" To kind of protect themselves,
Right.
Which I feel like that kind of falls under this, they have the power to change their form. So it kind of makes sense that they could do that if they wanted to.
Right. I'd be much less likely to chase a Sasquatch into the woods than a little fairy.
Right.
So did I see that? Instead of, oh my God, I've got to get out of here.
So this is why when you're in this astral plane, you gotta, be mindful of the fact that the being that you're talking to might not be as it appears.
Yeah.
So, you want to be protected and aware that some of these beings can play tricks, and if you're not aware, you'll be more defenseless and maybe fall for some of their tricks. This is kind of what I was talking about earlier. Sight is much more extended. An object is seen from all sides at once, which is very fourth dimensional, right?
Right.
Numbers are read in reverse. Every material object and particle has its astral counterpart, which is, we're in this room, there's a crystal, there's a coffee cup, there's me and you, there's my computer. All of these forms have an astral counterpart, right? Even what we would see as just an object still has an astral counterpart.
It's exactly the way it's depicted in TV shows and movies, and like in Stranger Things, the Upside Down. That, it's all the same but reversed. But whatever you see here, you're going to see there. Trees, buildings, it's there, but it's just reversed.
Right.
They do a good job in depicting it that way, I think.
Right. It does help to have that kind of visualization of the mirror image. And if you think about, Alice in Wonderland, she's like falling into the mirror, and that's her whole experience in Wonderland is very similar to like being in the astral plane.
Yeah.
You've got these characters. The Cheshire Cat's like changing his form. He's showing up here or there, sort of laughing at her, playing tricks on her, messing with her mind. Mm-hmm. And then there's just these like, she's just meeting all sorts of weird inhabitants. Yeah. Right. So, and she can interact with them.
Yeah.
It seems like sometimes she's just walking right past them. Not everybody's paying her much attention.
Right.
But she can interact because she's in her astral form, and so they can see her.
Yeah.
But if, the astral beings can't necessarily see us unless we have somehow are in that more astral figure, and we can't really see them unless we're in. So it's like these worlds are stacked on top of each other, and we're literally living in the same, like, when you think of planes, I think there's this division, but it's actually all right here.
Right.
So it's just that we can only see it when we're looking through our astral vision.
Yeah. And, another theory with the Sasquatch is that it's coming in and out of the plane into this plane. So every now and again,
it can materialize physically if it wants to.
Yeah. It's like whether it's a glitch or a tear, or even just it choosing to come in and out, whatever it may be.
Right.
It's just walking into our reality where we see it and then walking back out again.
Right. And maybe we're at that point just sort of in that more psychic perception where we're seeing it, and then we're slipping out because we're thinking about it, and then it's putting us back in our physical body. So it could be kind of both of us, because we're all sort of in and out of these planes.
It could be that way for any elemental being, fairies or elves or dwarves or anything of that nature. They could come in and out as they choose, which is why we don't always see them. But every now and again, someone will have a sighting somewhere.
Right. The comic aura colors change with different desires moment to moment. There exist colors beyond our ordinary spectrum. So when you think about, you go get your aura photographed, it's pretty solid. It's not going to change second to second. Now, if you go do some yoga, you might have some different energies enter the field. Mm-hmm. But the astral aura is going to be constantly flickering different colors out, depending on each thought. Mm. Okay. Because in the astral plane, this is the realm of thought forms. So we have the thought of, maybe it's like a sexual thought. We're going to light up a bunch of reds. It's going to be that passionate, the colors that represent passion. But then we might think about like, our guardian angel, and it might flicker into this white color. But we're constantly having thoughts going in and out, mm-hmm. and we're having different feelings to those thoughts. And so it's going to be in a more fluid state of where the colors are going to be changing. And it might even be a color that we can't see here in the physical realm, because we're no longer in the physical.
Well, we can only see a small sliver of the color spectrum with our perception here.
Right.
Which is wild to think about.
All right. The astral vision possesses the power of magnifying at will the minutest physical particle to any desired size. I really liked how, I don't remember what I was reading. Oh, that's what it was. So I had just read this section, and then my friend had posted this Tesla quote with a fourth dimensional object in as the picture. And Tesla, I can't remember exactly what he was saying, but it just made me really aware that Tesla was more of an initiate. Mm-hmm. And I do think that he was able to go into the astral plane. And I think he was able to observe a lot from there. And he's a really great example of how, if our scientists could sort of have the best of both worlds, they would have an even deeper understanding of the particles that they're observing, and like the meaning, and like, and I think Tesla could see it from all these different perspectives, and that's how he was able to actually create something like new and different. And, because you're really able to magnify it and really focus in on what it is that you're looking at. And so I do think some of the really good scientists that have that more spiritual life, Tesla was always going to like Vivekananda's lectures. He was very into like observing the Vedas and like the spiritual aspects of science. And I think he was merging them, and that's how he was able to, make these great strides in science like that. No one else was able to connect these dots, and we're still digesting what the heck he was even doing, because a lot of us didn't have that language.
Right.
We couldn't even visualize what he was doing until we saw the electricity flying, and we're like, okay, well, I guess he's doing something.
He's definitely up to something up there.
So, yeah, okay. So let's start talking about the inhabitants. So he splits them up into 3 classes: human, non-human, and artificial. So I love how complicated some of this gets, because it's like, here's what we're talking about, and then we're going to subdivide that, and then we're going to subdivide that, and then we're going to get even, But I'm going to try to ground this for you guys. But, okay, so we're dividing them into 3, and now we're going to divide this first one, which was the human, into 2, which is the living and the dead. Okay, makes sense?
Makes sense, yeah.
Okay. So the living beings that you might encounter are the adept or Sheila in the Maya Varupa. What does that mean to you?
I'm not sure.
Okay, so I'm going to read about it. This body is the artificial vehicle used on the 4 lower or Rupa divisions of the Devachanic plane by those capable. It is formed out of the substance of the mind-body. A person traveling in the Maya Varupa is not perceivable to merely astral vision unless they choose to make themselves so, by gathering around themselves particles of astral matter, creating a temporary body suitable for the plane. So you're not probably going to see any of these beings, but it's a possibility. And so Leadbeater goes into that just to kind of say these do exist. It's not as common as running into, an ordinary person.
So are these adepts that are astral projecting?
Yes.
Okay.
Under, maybe instruction of a guru, or, they're being trained. And they can make themselves appear if they want to.
They're running around or flying around.
Right. And I think about like the
Okay.
Maya Varupa is sort of like the Merkaba. It's sort of a very consciously made vehicle.
Okay.
Right. And they're just kind of flying around into the different planes, studying, doing their thing. Who knows what they're doing. But he's letting you know that you might bump into one of these, and that this is a living being, right? This is a person like me or you who could potentially project our consciousness through this vehicle.
Okay.
And materialize ourselves if we were, trained to do that. So 2, the psychically developed person who is under the guidance of a master. Similar to what we were talking about. He will appear as always in the astral body, since by hypothesis, he does not know how to form the Maya Varupa yet. So that's something that they are taught, right, is to create it for themselves. But sometimes I've read that like the teacher is creating that form for them.
Okay.
And then they kind of evolve into being able to do that themselves, which I think is the adept or the Sheila. Like that's kind of their initiation into that. The ordinary person is someone you might see just floating around in their astral body in a more or less unconscious condition, in deep slumber. The higher principles of the astral vehicle almost invariably withdrawn from the body, and they hover in its immediate neighborhood. So this is something you might see your friends sleeping. You're sleeping, you might sort of wake up and be like, oh, I can see my friend's astral body. He's just sort of laying there unconscious. A lot of times we are kind of just resting. If we're not consciously trying to do anything, we might just be hovering around, and wherever what we're dreaming of, we might project our astral body to that location.
Right.
But a lot of people are very unconscious in this plane. So they're kind of just floating.
Would the first two, would that be also reminiscent of remote viewing?
Yeah, I mean, an ordinary person could project their astral body and view
But in
Antarctica
right.
or whatever.
That's the thing with remote viewing, is that you're observing the physical world as opposed to observing the astral world. Although it may be one and the same, but
Right, so you can observe the physical realm from your astral body.
yeah.
And I would say this is usually conscious. You know, I have heard of many people doing remote viewing consciously, but then I had that experience as a child where I watched my brother pass away. I was in the car with him. It was very much happening in real time, and I wasn't intentionally doing that.
Yeah.
I think it's just that like we were so succinct, and like his emotions, like his rush of like, I'm going to run from the police. And I was asleep, and
Yeah.
something about that, you know, I projected there and watched the whole scene happen, and then was told, you know,
Later what had happened.
right. And I was like, holy shit. I just saw that. So that is a case of remote viewing where it was very unintentional. Right. And I think maybe like when we love someone, you know, we're really interconnected with that person's emotional body, aka astral body. And we might pull them to us.
Right.
If they're asleep, we might be able to call them in. And so I think in that moment, I was kind of like acting as like an angel, a guide for him as he was crossing over
Yeah.
from that astral form, which was really, really traumatizing. As you know, I think I was like 12 or 13 or something. So it was not, it wasn't a pleasant experience for me, but I'll never forget it because it was so real, and it was immediately confirmed that this happened. I mean, like 30 minutes later, my mother gets the call right after the dream.
It's
like
wild.
I'm awake. I'm like, holy shit. And then my mother comes in the room and is like, your brother's dead. So I'm like, okay. Right. Like this is, you know, and it's like these experiences, you know, have validated this for me. So
Yeah.
yes, I'm studying this, you know, I try to look at it from these different angles, but I believe in this stuff because I've had a personal experience with the information. Before I started studying it, I was already having experiences. And then I wanted to seek out information that could help me understand or rationalize what the hell I was having experiences with. Like, are other people seeing this? Are other people projecting their, you know, their self while they're sleeping? You know, so for me, it's not like I was being influenced by some outer thing, or I was in a cult or whatever. It's like I needed some language to help me ground and describe the experiences I was just naturally having.
Right.
And I think many of us come at it from that way, that we have a near-death experience, or we're lucid dreaming, or we're having sleep paralysis or whatever. And it's like, okay, I want to Google that.
Right.
And I really love it because we have these people that have documented this for us, right? Mapped out the astral plane. You know, Leadbeater's just one of many. Like Steiner has like an insane amount of information on the astral plane. So if you read this book and enjoy it, you can, you know, flip over into that anthroposophical perspective and study all of Steiner's really juicy, good stuff on the astral plane, which I had some quotes from him, but I just feel like it's so much information that I'm trying to focus just on Leadbeater for this because that's just enough. Okay. So, the last of the living beings that you might encounter is the Black Magician and his people. The big side note I have for this is that their powers acquired are used for purely selfish purposes instead of the benefit for humanity. That's really what separates white and black magic, is the selfish motive. And it's not that a white magician can't use magic with, you know, selfish intent. It's just that if your selfish intent comes at the harm of another being,
Right.
then it becomes black magic. It's not like you can't say, you know, I want to manifest abundance. That doesn't make you a selfish black magician.
Right.
But if your abundance comes at, oh, I want to do this and like sacrifice my dog or whatever to, you know, really empower this ritual, now you're a black magician.
Right.
Which is what I would say to stay the heck away from. And he does go into, you know, some of the really negative aspects of black magic and the way that it has been, you know, used throughout history for really, really negative means and set humanity back many times. So we just don't want, I'm never going to suggest anyone do that.
Right.
So I'm
of course
very
not.
much more on the, you can totally be selfish, but not at
The expense of others.
Yes. Right. Okay. So the next section of inhabitants is the dead. And this isn't, we think of the dead like a zombie. It's not really like that. It's just people who are currently unattached to a physical body. And the dead can be divided into 9 sections.
Wow.
So, yes, the first is the Nirmanakayas, which are also associated with the Bodhisattvas. And I was thinking about just reading from this section because this is kind of hard for me to explain. It's like he starts with the most complicated and then goes into, the form that would make most sense as he moves. So for this section, the Nirmanakaya, he says, this class is just mentioned in order to make the catalog complete. But it is, of course, very rarely indeed that so exalted a being manifests himself upon so low of a plane as this. When for any reason connected with his sublime work he found it desirable to do so, he would probably create a temporary astral body for the purpose, just as the adept in the Maya Varupa would do, since the more refined vesture would be invisible to astral sight. Further information about the position and work of the Nirmanakayas may be found in Madame Blavatsky's Theosophical Glossary and The Voice of the Silence, which I did look this up because I happen to have this book. And the big thing that came up was the connection with the Bodhisattvas, and also that these particular beings create a guardian wall that shields mankind invisibly from worse evil. So they're kind of operating for the sake of humanity, protecting us, making sure that certain things don't get in and interact or interfere with our free will and our evolution. Okay, so you're probably not going to run into these, but he just throws it out there that you might. The second one is the Sheila, which it can be translated as a disciple, awaiting reincarnation. When a pupil reaches a certain stage, he is able, with assistance from a master, to escape from the action of what is in ordinary cases the law of nature. But it is rare. But in some cases, one is able to avoid the trouble of a new birth by being placed directly into an adult body whose previous tenant has no future use for it. But it is not often that a suitable body is available. More often, he must await a birth that suits him. So when I was reading this, it made me think of walk-ins, which we've heard about.
Right.
Like this person has like given up, they don't want to live anymore. They've, something has happened, and then suddenly they get a change of heart and someone's like, I don't even know if I know this person anymore. Like they've totally changed since that near-death experience, right? Mm-hmm. And this might be the case, but like they're saying, it's usually they're going to have to wait for a birth that is suitable for their unfoldment, right? And these beings, because they never went into that devachanic plane, they kind of stayed here. They're going to be able to remember more. Right.
They won't have that forgetting that comes with death and rebirth.
Right. Which is why you might want, why some being might want to do this. I wouldn't necessarily want to do this. I'm like, give me the bliss state. I want to rest in between incarnations, but that's just where I'm at. Most people are not at this point.
It would be very wild to go from one grown body to another with the same consciousness.
Yeah, it would be weird. Okay. So next, the ordinary person after death. That makes sense. There are those who only pass a few days or hours here. Others remain upon this level for many years or even centuries. One who has led a pure life will have no attraction to this plane. They will be able to move from this plane quick because they've stripped away a lot of their animal passions, and they will more quickly move into the blissful rest of Devachan. The average man has not freed himself from the lower desires and must allow the forces he has generated with those lower desires. He must allow them to dissolve themselves, and thus he releases the higher ego. All right, so that's sort of the description there of like why the ordinary person is very commonly found here.
Right.
Because most people aren't doing that kind of work, and they stay in this plane for quite a while until those impulses and desires have been resolved. So the next being that you might encounter is the shade. So me and you had to sit with this one for a minute because it felt very hard to comprehend. So I'm going to read and then we'll talk about it. The shade is an entity which is not in any sense the real individual at all, for he has passed away into Devachan, but nevertheless bears his exact personal appearance, possesses his memory and all of his little idiosyncrasies, and may therefore very readily impersonate him, as indeed it frequently does at seances. Just like when we die and leave our physical body behind, so when we die to the astral plane, we leave our kama rupa behind. Kama rupa translates to desire body. So this was kind of creepy to me. And we'll go into it because the shade is also like kind of goes into the shell and then the vitalized shell. So these three kind of go together. So the shade is like stage 1. And it's like the soul has kind of moved on, but there's still this, aspect of them that has some of the memories and like the personality, and like it's still kind of there. But it's like when you read a book about a dead person, you're not actually, even if it's like an autobiography, you might hear their voice in your head when you're reading it, but they're not actually reading that to you, right?
Yeah.
You're reading their book. So I feel like the shade is sort of like what's left behind. Like they've crossed over, but you can still access some of their energy. Mm-hmm. Like it still exists there. Just like I was saying earlier with the physical body, you could still draw blood and like look at the DNA and get a whole story about how they might have crossed over and things like that. So the next stage is the shell. And this is the mere astral corpse in the process of disintegration. Every particle of the lower manas has left it. It is entirely without any kind of consciousness or intelligence and is drifting passively about on the astral currents, just as a cloud would pass by on a breeze. And then we have the vitalized shell. This is always a malevolent being, a true tempting demon whose evil influence is limited only by the extent of its power. Like the shade, it's frequently used to further horrible purposes of dark magic. So this makes me think of like the Princess and the Frog, like the Shadow Man, like grabbing onto someone's shell and vitalizing it and then using it for their own purposes to like, okay, go do this task for me.
Right.
Right. And so this is dark magic. We don't want to advocate this, but it is a possibility that you might be seeing something like this when you're here.
And all of those are connected and referenced with things like seances and can easily be used by other entities, right, or dark magicians or something. And so you really probably should never be doing seances. And if you are, you need to be incredibly mindful and safe and understand that whatever you're going to be talking to or is coming through can super easily just be one of these shells that's being used by another entity. Or the shade, which still contains somebody's memories or some of their leftover stuff from the past life. Here you are thinking you're talking to Grandpa. Right. But it is not Grandpa.
And it's really hard to discern.
Right.
And so it's almost just not worth the risk.
Yeah.
In that way. And he talks about seances a lot, and he does say that there have been occasions where certain initiates have done seances and pulled in some really good spiritual information. Their intentions are pure. They're not doing it for show or money, and they need answers to something. And so it's not that it's impossible to get good information from a seance, but it doesn't seem like he advocates for it because there's so much opportunity to be misled or to have someone, using this in a negative way.
Right.
And you kind of just want this being to be able to cross over and stop messing with them.
Right.
Right. Let them go into Devachan, let them sleep, and leave them alone.
And, if you follow the levels of this, then if the person you're trying to contact was a good person or a spiritually advanced person, then the likelihood that they're still in the astral plane in a communicative state is very unlikely. They have probably already passed on to Devachan, and therefore their shell or their shade is much more likely to not even be them. It's just the shadow of them, which would be, possessible. And then also the further out from their death that they've gotten, the less likely it is that it's them, the more likely that they've moved on to the next level.
Right. Okay, so the next inhabitant is the suicide or victim of sudden death. A person who is torn from their physical life hurriedly while in full health or strength, whether by accident or suicide, finds himself on the astral plane under conditions differing considerably from those which surround one who dies either from old age or disease. This totally makes sense for me, because if you think about someone who is, kind of crossing over slowly, like their etheric body's like, the impulses are slowing down. They're processing a lot of things. They're
Right.
like, they know that they're going to die. Like when you're 90, like you're slowly like, you're watching your friends die, your spouse might have crossed over. You're really having to go ahead and kind of prepare.
Yeah.
And you're sort of releasing the ghost like over time.
Mm-hmm.
So it makes sense that this would be, you've already processed a lot of those desires. You've integrated some of your lessons. You might not have to stay in this plane as long. But if you are ripped from your body,
Yeah.
and it's full of vitality still, and you haven't processed your death at all, and you haven't analyzed any of your, you're just some young person that had a car wreck, it's going to, you might have to be here longer to like process
Yeah.
a lot of the things that you didn't get to experience or learn or whatever. And with, suicides, obviously, when they are crossing over, they're in this very emotional state, and it's very conflicting, and it's just, they're carrying all of that over.
Right.
They don't just get to take their own life and become an angelic form.
Yeah.
They have to now face all of those demons that they were trying to avoid in this life. And it can be very, very challenging,
And it can take a while.
Right.
It's certainly nothing that you're going to work
They
through
have to process
quickly.
it.
Yeah.
They have to do the work. They have to process it. So, it's just even more important to be mindful of that and not try to take the easy way out.
There is no such thing.
Right. Because you eventually have to do the work.
Right.
You don't get to avoid it. So the next one is the vampire and the werewolf. This is very rare, and he says that they're mostly relics from earlier races that we don't really see as much these days. But you absolutely hear tales of vampires and werewolves. And he's basically stating that they are astral entities.
And they did come from legitimate stories.
Right. And then, he didn't go into egregores, but a lot of these beings could fall under egregores. We tell these tales, people believe them, and now enough people believe it where we've created a thought form, like Santa Claus or whoever, and now those beings exist in an astral form because we've given birth to them.
Yeah.
So I think that these two beings could also exist based on the fact that enough people have read these stories. We are like agreeing upon the traits of a vampire or whatever. But, he goes into more detail, which I'm not going to get too off track here because we've already hit an hour. So I'm going to keep moving. Number 9 is the black magician and his pupil. So these particular beings may try to maintain themselves in Kamaloka by magical arts, sometimes in the most horrible nature. So
Seems weird that you would want to maintain yourself in Kamaloka. I don't know what benefit you might have in doing that, but it seems odd to me.
right, I'm sure they have their purpose,
Yeah.
and I'm sure it's with selfish intent, and I'm sure it wreaks all sorts of havoc on their soul and their growth. So it's just, he brings it up not to suggest anyone do this, but that you might stumble upon this, right?
Right, of course.
He's not advocating any of this. Okay, so let's move on to the non-human. In the golden age before the Kali Yuga, men were, on the whole, less selfish and more spiritual. And then the elementals were friendly, though now they are no longer so because of man's indifference to or want of sympathy with other living beings. So, he goes on to talk about other elementals, so I won't stay on this too long, but it seems as though the fact that it's the elemental essence belonging to our own evolution, this is kind of something that we've had and are working towards,
Hmm.
maybe like rediscovering. I don't know. That seems a little convoluted to me.
It makes sense because you think about old stories and stuff that men had connections with. I think of the sea, or mermaids, or things like that, and we did seem to have more of a connection too. But now we're totally disconnected from, and I definitely think it may be something that we are going back to.
Right. And this may be, he talks a lot about the Atlanteans and, the good and the bad aspects of the Atlanteans. We usually focus on the end, which is what everyone tends to see because of the trauma associated with it. But, there were times where they were very advanced and it was a beautiful thing. And I do think that at this point, the psychic sight was still open and that they were like able to work with the elemental beings. And then I have read that they misused that power and then kind of wanted to make them into like the slave race.
Yeah.
The elementals have their own purpose and their own destiny, and it has nothing to do with humanity. And so, I think we misused that power and that now, and then it kind of got taken from us because of that. All right, the next one is the Kamarupa of animals. It says the vast majority of animals have not acquired permanent individualization, and when one of them dies, the monadic essence, which has been stratum where it came, bearing with it such advancement or experiences as has been attained during that life. The kamic aura of the animal forms itself a kamarupa, and the animal has existence on the astral plane, which varies according to the intelligence which what has developed. In most cases, it does not seem to be more than dreamily conscious, but appears to be perfectly happy. So you may stumble upon pink elephants here, right?
Right.
Animals are evolving in, going up that spectrum into more of like having that individualization, like humans. But some animals are more advanced. Like it talked about like the orangutans are like really close to, having like a true individuality
Yeah.
and understanding and starting to like connect to maybe like the higher mind, right? All animals have an astral form, but not all of them have quite evolved into using those mental faculties, which comes over time. But they have the possibility
Right.
to do that through evolution.
Do you think that this might be where you would find mythical animals, such as like a unicorn or something like that?
Maybe. I think that those might still be associated with maybe elementals
Okay.
to a certain extent. Here we go. This is your answer. Nature spirits of all kinds. In medieval literature, the earth spirits are called gnomes, water spirits, undines, air spirits as sylphs. The ether spirits are known as salamanders. In popular language, they are known by many names: fairies, pixies, elves, brownies, paris, jinn, trolls, satyrs, fauns, imps, goblins, etc. Their forms vary, but most frequently are human in shape, but they can assume any appearance that they like. So that's probably, your centaur, your unicorn, and things like that.
Okay.
And they can, because if they're in the astral plane, they can shift.
Right.
So a centaur can turn into a human looking thing, or it can turn into a horse looking thing. A lot of these beings do have a form that they feel most comfortable in, that you're going to probably see them in. But if for some reason it's for their own protection, they could manipulate their form and present themselves however they want. And the last of this plane are the devas. This is the highest system of evolution connected with Earth. Though the devas are connected to Earth, they are by no means confined to it. The aim of their evolution is considerably higher than ours. They are able to take human material forms at will, and several cases are recorded when they have done so. But, most of the time, they kind of have their own purpose and desires that extend beyond what our human mind can comprehend.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so getting into the last of the three inhabitants are the artificial. One, the elementals that are formed unconsciously. This is sort of elementals that we're, so these are like thought forms, right, that humans are creating. So I'll just read this. The action of the mere casual wandering thought upon it, causing it to burst into a cloud of rapidly moving evanescent forms, has already been described. We have now to know how it is affected when the human mind formulates a definite, purposeful wish or thought. The thought seizes upon the plastic essence and molds it instantly into a living being of appropriate form. A being once created is no longer under the control of its owner, but lives its own life of their own, which is very interesting. And I think it's important to be mindful of like your thoughts and like that they are creating thought forms in the astral plane, and you just want to make sure you're creating like beautiful, like loving light energy is coming from you.
Yeah.
So the second is elementals formed consciously. A magician who understands this subject and can see exactly what effect that they are having may wield immense power along these lines. Occultists, both white and dark, frequently use artificial elementals in their work, and few tasks are beyond the powers of such creatures. So these are elementals that are consciously made for a purpose. And then the human artificials, which was super hard for me to comprehend, and I may just suggest you guys read it, but I'll just quickly go into what I pulled from the section. So this method is adopted around taking an ordinary person after death, arousing them thoroughly on the astral plane, and instructing them to do certain things. So it's like a human is like projecting their consciousness and trying to use and affect someone else's astral shell. And like work with it. And I don't know, it seems really like I didn't enjoy this concept. And it does specifically say that none of the adepts from the Great Brotherhood ever approved of this formation of an artificial entity. But they also can't like not let someone do, because free will, right? So they can do what they want, but it is sort of like you're taking over like the shell of another being who's probably crossed over into Devachan and using its energy.
Right.
For whatever your purpose is.
Very much dark magic.
Right. I mean, I couldn't see it being associated much with white magic. Maybe on a rare occasion, if the person who had crossed over gave permission.
Right.
To utilize their shell, because they're not going to need it anymore, but maybe it still holds a lot of good information that could benefit humanity or something. Maybe that would be a positive way to do this, but I would just suggest... I'm only bringing it up because I'm trying to go into everything he brings up in the book.
It's the exact equivalent, like you said earlier, to someone using your physical body after you've passed on. You can potentially use it.
And they can sign something saying you can take my heart.
Right.
And that's ethical.
Right. But in most instances, when you imagine somebody using your physical body after death, it's a very horrible or terrible thing that they're doing.
Frankenstein's monster. He's just like sewing parts together and
right,
trying to just be selfishly creative just to see what he can do.
Right. Yeah, using it in some terrible form, and so it's the same thing except on the astral plane. You're using their astral body after they've passed on into Devachan and they've left that shell.
Right.
And so it's very likely it's not going to be for good use.
All right, so let's just briefly go over the phenomena, which is the last section of this book. Things that you can associate with the astral plane that most people have heard of. Ghosts.
Yeah.
In order to see a ghost, he says one must either materialize or the person that's seeing the ghost might have a flash of psychic perception. But, most of these ghost stories are coming from people seeing like the astral form, or people are slipping into their astral body while awake and witnessing like what's going on around them. He goes into churchyard ghosts. So this is a little bit different because churchyard ghosts are the etheric shell of a newly buried person. So it stays really close to the body and it's still like kind of slowly disintegrating. How like the astral body slowly, disintegrating. The etheric body does that as well, which, we talked about the etheric body in the last episode. You may also potentially see the astral body of a living man haunting in his sleep the tomb of a friend. So maybe that person's asleep, thinking of his friend's, burial or something like that, and he might be projecting its astral body to that location. So you could see that. But most of the time, I think what we see over graves is just the remnants of the etheric body. And as someone who, grew up on Cemetery Road and had a graveyard as my backyard for most of my childhood, you can see sort of a light figure around the newly buried people.
Right.
Right. And, it's not really like taking much of a form. It's just like an energy that's not there once that. So if I go to, you have on your property that really old cemetery.
Yeah.
And when I'm there, like, I don't really feel anything. Those people have been dead for
Those are
like
really
hundreds
old
of
graves.
years.
Yeah.
And, their etheric body has very much,
It's long gone.
disintegrated.
They're not.
But I lived next to a very fresh cemetery where, new bodies were coming in, probably every couple months we would have someone new buried there. And so it was different because there were more fresh, shells there.
But they're not going to wander far, and they're not going to do anything.
Yes, they're not
going to
consciously aware.
Yeah.
Right. They don't have desires. The etheric body is not the astral body. It doesn't have desires.
It's just hovering outside of their physical body in the same general vicinity.
Right. Waiting to basically be disintegrated.
Yeah. Still creepy, but it's not a threat or anything to actually be really afraid of.
Right. So other things associated with the astral plane, the apparitions of the dying. So you could potentially see the astral form of a dying man before the moment of dissolution, which totally happens. Someone's like, I think Yogananda tells a story about how he received like a message from his mother before she crossed over. And it's like she knew she was going to die. She projected her body to be like, hey, I love you. And it's like that they know that they're crossing over, and they want to make sure that their loved ones know that they're going to be okay and that they love them. And so it's a pretty reoccurring thing, but they're projecting their astral form to your, astral form, which is receiving the information. Then you wake up and you're like, oh my gosh, I just had a dream about my mom and now she's crossed over. Right.
Right.
Haunted localities can also be associated with astral phenomena. So it's talking about how a lot of these haunted places are thought forms, and sometimes you'll see them kind of light up on the anniversary of a crime. Places that have had a lot of mental disturbance that's occurred there. Like I think about like some of the Holocaust places and,
sure, yeah.
Like it was just a lot of negative thoughts occurred there. Someone who's psychically sensitive, but even just a regular person, may walk through that and be like, I just feel like eerie.
Mm-hmm.
And what you're experiencing are these thought forms that have been sort of trapped and projected into that location. But it is, associated with the astral plane. People that are more sensitive to the astral light might actually be able to visualize some of the scenes of what happened. Like this area in the corner is where the person was tortured, and then but even someone that's completely unconscious of it might be like, I went into this haunted house, they say it's haunted. I felt really uncomfortable there. I don't even believe in ghosts, right? Even those people might pick up on some of it because It's just like, it's such a negative thing. And if you're not a negative person, you're gonna be like, ugh, like I just had this worst thought. It might not be yours, right? It's kind of like crop dusting. You might just be walking through other people's thought forms. Right. Family ghost. These are thought forms or impressions in the astral light that could be like an earthbound ancestor that is still haunting scenes in which their thoughts and hopes centered during that life. He goes into like bell ringing and stone throwing, which kind of occurs sometimes in seances, that these are a lot of times elemental forces attracting attention, or it could be your loved one crossing over to get that attention from you. Right. So that's kind of what is happening when we have those situations. Fairies are associated with the astral plane, which we kind of already talked about, communicating entities. Then it goes into astral resources. The astral plane may be regarded many ways only an extension of the physical, and the idea that matter may assume an etheric state in which, though intangible to us, it is yet purely physical, may serve to show us how the one melts into the other. Quickly, just some of the other things that he goes over is clairvoyance, provision in second sight, astral forces, etheric currents, etheric pressure, latent energy, sympathetic vibration, mantras, disintegration and materialization, and spirit photographs, which that one was really cool because I watched this whole thing, like years and years ago, so I don't remember even what it was, with the spirit photographs, and like they could imprint that essence onto the camera film.
I've seen some of that before.
And
it's pretty wild.
It just is like mind blowing, right? And there was another thing we had Edison, like his signature, right? These are the signature thing would be like slate writing, but like once again, we don't really know that that's Edison, right? Something like that's the thing is like you really don't know. But it can be done, and that explains what's happening.
Yeah, and it's hard to imagine that. Of course, outside of this physical realm, time is completely different, but it's hard to imagine that the further and further out you get from somebody's existence, that they're actually available on the other side to communicate with you.
Right.
It seems far more likely that they've passed on into Devachan, into another realm, and whatever it is you're communicating is something either toying with you or possessing something, or
right.
It just seems illogical.
Okay, some of the other things would be reduplication, precipitation, levitation, which I thought was interesting. So basically what he's saying is in these seances, or like, these stories of the Eastern yogis, what they're doing is neutralizing or even entirely reversing the attraction of gravity. And so I suppose somehow the astral body is coming into that, which, kind of blew my mind. Spirit lights, handling fire. This is so cool. He says the thinnest layer of etheric substance can be so manipulated as to be absolutely impervious to heat. So that's what's going on when you see the people walking on the coals.
That's wild.
Yeah, they're like somehow putting that protective layer around them. And then the last two is transmutation, which goes into alchemy and how, it's normally just seen as like a process of evolving the soul, but that there actually are some cases of people actually changing the metal into gold, or like that it can actually be done.
Yeah.
But that wasn't necessarily like the intention of ancient alchemy. It was more about the progression of the soul.
You have to be a very high level adept and really understand the base atom structure of things to be able to do alchemy in a real sense.
Right. But you can read this book and read that section, and it was really fascinating. And the last thing would be repercussion. And in my notes, I have an injury done to or any mark made upon the astral body in the course of its wandering will be reproduced on the physical body. So that's where you might have a dream, like maybe you get smacked or something in the dream, you wake up and you have a bruise on the spot. That just is sort of explaining what has occurred.
All of that should reinforce the fact that you should be incredibly careful and mindful of what you're doing in the astral realm, whether it's ghost hunting or seances or trying to channel something in, especially something dark or something that you don't have any experience with, because there are a lot of real phenomena that can really affect you, whether your astral body or even your physical body. If you can get hurt in the physical and it can reproduce, or you can get hurt in the astral and it can be reproduced in your physical body by something that's possessing the shell of some previous person, then that's pretty scary, and
right,
it's
we want to
pretty
protect,
real.
We want to shield and protect our energy. That's the card I pull. I pull this card all the time. Shield and protect your energy, astral. I'm like, oh, thanks. I probably should do that. We have sovereignty over our being, and we can always shield ourselves and protect ourselves. A lot of people are just unaware of the power and authority that they have.
Yeah.
And so they're more susceptible to these games and tricks and projections from whether physical or astral or, whoever, because they're not aware that they even have the ability to protect themselves.
Yeah.
But you can always say no thanks.
Right.
And you can always, and I've talked about this, I've been on couple podcasts now talking about the astral plane, but something I learned really young was, by watching Harold and the Purple Crown, I got this, this thought of, oh wow, I can just draw my way out of this, and it really works.
Yeah.
You can always just create a door and walk through and go wherever you want to go. But some people, Harold and the Purple Crown gave me permission to do this, right?
Yeah.
It gave me the visualization. And it was so cool to have that, so young at like 5 years old, I've already mastered this thing that some people might not even realize is an option. But many times I've had nightmares and just went and like looked around and like created a door, walked through it, closed it. Now I'm in like, my closet or whatever.
Yeah.
But that's, AstralMeadow, my name actually it was inspired by this place that I created on the astral plane.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like a place of retreat that I could always go to if I was having a bad dream, or just whether in the real world or the astral plane, that I could go and feel safe. And it had a force field around it, and no one can come in unless they're invited. And there's just something about it that it was really empowering for me. And I even go to this place just in meditation sometimes, or maybe I'm in therapy and like I'm trying to process it. I might go to this meadow. And when I was choosing my spiritual name, I had the vision of my astral meadow. And, over time, I waited years before I finally decided to change my name. Went with Astral, and I went with Meadow because, it was associated with my birth last name.
Right.
So it translated just like perfectly. And so I kind of like really decided to kind of embody this, which is I can create myself. I can create my life. I can create the space that I'm in. And so there's something about Astral Meadow, like the name is so empowering because it reminds me of this whole like aspect of myself that I consciously created, just like I'm consciously creating the life that I'm living right now. So yeah, I don't know if I fully like talked about that on the show, but that's where my name came from. So yeah, I think cool. That it's probably good to wrap this up. I'm going to post a link to the Esoteric 7 Divisions thing. I'll post maybe the link to the PDF for CW Leadbeater's book. And if you're interested, he has a whole nother book on the Devachonic plane, and it's broken down just like this one on the astral plane, which I found so interesting. And, maybe I'll do a deep dive into that in the future if people are interested. Let me know if you like these deep dives. I put a lot of time into them. And so getting some kind of response is just more inspiring and encouraging for me to continue. But as always, I will continue to interview and work with guests on also creating episodes. But these are fun. And it's like I'm doing all this studying, and it's so nice to just have like a platform to share it with other people who might be having similar experiences, or might be like, oh, what, I've run into this vocabulary term so many times, but like couldn't ground it, and that's where I've learned a lot along the way, is studying aside another person who's like, oh yeah, I remember that word totally stumped me.
Right.
So it is nice to read books and study on our own, but sometimes it's also nice to share what we're learning with others, to kind of validate and ground what we're experiencing and reading.
Right. And the other person usually has their own experience and their own perspective that they can filter it through, which may help you gain a better understanding of the concept or the idea in some way that you've never thought of, or in a whole different way.
Right. Yes. One of the reasons I really wanted to do this episode is that as I was, studying the astral plane, I didn't find a lot of content. When I typed it in, it would just bring up CW Leadbeater's book, and it was just people reading it.
It was just the audio book.
No one was going through, breaking it down and discussing it. And that is something I just love.
I don't know why.
It's the content I wish people would create.
Yeah.
Like I wish people would not only just read from Steiner's archive, but like maybe like talk about what Steiner's talking about.
Yeah.
And, spend time going into some of the vocabulary or showing you where you can look that up. Because I think a lot of the occult stuff, it's these levels of like initiation you take along the path, and you're going to just absolutely not know what they're talking about. Like when I first started studying Theosophy and Anthroposophy, I had no ability to understand any of the language. So I would just take one word at a time and write the definition down and look up other books on that subject. Right. And so now I'm a decade into this deep dive. And I'm always, stumbling upon new concepts and new things. So if some of this felt really foreign and it felt really deep, hold that and be okay with that, knowing that you have all this time to process and explore some of these topics more, and that it's not like we are just taught this language in our day-to-day life. So it doesn't make someone stupid or, like inadequate to not know all of this. It's a process of learning. And and not just learning it, but then you take this wisdom that you're learning and actually incorporate it into your life. So learning about the astral plane not only empowered me in my dream state, not only inspires me with like remote viewing and like looking into my past lives and things like that, but it also was so good for me as educating me on my desires. My emotions are creating thought beings in the astral plane. All of these desires that I have are showing up there. And when I die, I'm going to have to be responsible for them. And so to me, it's not just like interesting introspection. It's like really valuable because now I'm very aware. When I'm like mad at someone, I have to, like, I try to do like rituals to get over it really quickly. I don't want to think about that. I don't want to project negative thoughts onto another being.
Yeah.
So I'm more responsible for my emotions now and saying, okay, I'm feeling anger or hate towards this person. I need to take care of this quick.
Right.
To protect that person from my anger. Because even if I do find someone, you know, just disgusting and repulsive, I still don't want to harm them.
Right. Of course.
I don't want to unconsciously do black magic. But when we are in anger and we're thinking awful things about a person, we're absolutely dipping our toe into black magic. So it's really important. And learning this has made me very aware that my emotions are very real. And on this plane, they're like really important. So.
Yeah. And like we've said, you know, whatever you're struggling with now, it doesn't end when you die. And whether it's by natural causes or even if you take yourself out or whatever it is that happens, you still have to deal with whatever you were dealing with in this life. And so if you've got lots of problems or lots of addictions or lots of things that you're not facing or struggling with, you're still going to work on them when you pass on. And so I think knowing that helps you work harder while you're alive, because I think it's probably easier to work on it here than it might be to work on it there.
Right, to release some of those addictive things that you don't even think about. Like the television. You know, when my dad crossed over, the first thing that guy did was come to my house and turn on the Andy Griffith Show.
He wanted to keep watching TV.
He wanted to keep watching TV. And if I hadn't have worked with him to cross over, he might have gotten really trapped into, you know, wasting a lot of his energy just replaying these old episodes.
And me personally, I will be anxious to get to the bliss state of Devachan.
Right.
Where people, you know, that's what you'd consider heaven. That's where I would want to be. I don't want to keep cycling through on these lower astral realms, you know, stuck around bars trying to get another drink, or stuck around people, you know, trying to get my next fix from whatever it may be.
Right.
I want to get on to that blissful state that exists beyond. And so once you learn about it, then it's up to you to fix it.
Right. And I think, you know, we see things like, and it's taught in religion, like the deadly sins and the vices and like, but they're not telling you why it's important to work on those. Like, why is it important to, you know, keep your lust and sexual desires contained and directed in a positive, healthy way? Well, because it, you know, it can be addicting.
Right.
Right. And then you cross over and now you have this like sexual addiction.
Mm-hmm.
And like, who knows how you're going to act upon it.
Right.
Right. And same with like food, you know, and gluttony, like that could be alcohol, that could be Little Debbie cakes. Like you're going to crave it.
Right.
But you're not going to have it anymore. And so it's really important to be mindful that addictions are not just, you know, like opioids or whatever, you know, we can be addicted to all sorts of things.
Yeah.
And if you notice it's like really hard to be without something, I would suggest doing practices around working on that even more. I've had certain things that, you know, they're like, oh, this isn't addictive or whatever. And then I try to give it up and I'm struggling.
Yeah.
Like struggling with something that's supposedly non-addictive.
Yeah.
And so what do? I play with that even more. And I'm like, well, I'm going to give it up.
Yeah.
Because I want to make sure that this is not controlling me and that I'm a sovereign being. Like I can do this on my own. Right. I don't want to rely on whether it's like, coffee or, television or just whatever we're hyper fixating on. We just want to make sure that we're okay,
Right.
taking like sabbaticals and like giving it up and working on the fact that, it might have some kind of control over us.
Yeah.
So anyways, yeah, being mindful of all of our little desires and addictions might carry over.
Yeah. Knowing that life continues after life really makes you look at the way you're living much differently, and really makes the work that you have to do so much more worth it.
Right. Yeah, and the fact that you're going to be reincarnating, and if you stop it and just tell people that they're going to cross over and go to heaven and everything's great and
That's
nothing,
it.
then you can see how this is actually disempowering when they discover like, oh wow, I am a baby again, and now I'm in a really shitty fucking situation because I fucking avoided this work in my previous life and pushed it off and decided to drink it away.
Lived like there was no tomorrow.
Right. And now they're starting over, which is fine. Like, it's really great that they have that chance.
Right.
But we just, like, this is where, like, avoidance doesn't work.
Yeah.
So just
it's all about the balance.
Facing it and then cultivating your path and making conscious choices to move yourself into your own spiritual evolution. Like, that is so awesome. Now, some people don't care about any of that. That's kind of like, that's my hyperfixation, right?
It all connects, because whether, I had several thoughts, and it's whether we were talking about our shadow in the episode we did, or whether we were talking about some of the Hermetic principles. It's always about finding that balance right down the middle.
Right.
And,
the fulcrum.
Yeah. And not too light, not too dark, not too heavy, not too light. All of that, it's right down the middle. It's that middle path.
Yes.
And so you enjoy things. You're not just stuck in a cave all by yourself, but you do enjoy life, but you live it the right way and take care of yourself and try to get rid of the things that are hurting you, and enjoy the things that you love and that are loving you back.
Right. Right. So it's not like pleasure in itself is a bad thing, because
Right.
like humans are made for pleasure.
Yeah, that's part of the physical realm here.
But if you're using pleasure as a means of escaping reality and like the work that you came here to do,
Or overdoing it or misusing it.
right. Like food is great, but if we're eating little Debbie cakes for every meal, now that's a form of self-sabotage.
Poor little Debbie. We're hating on her hard, but it's true. It's totally true.
But having a little Debbie cake on occasion, and there's nothing wrong with that.
Right.
Right. It's moderation. It's being mindful to not let it control you.
Yeah.
To where you're like, man, I don't even want to eat this, but my body's now addicted to sugar, and so now I'm eating it even though I want to cry about it as soon as I'm done. Like that is what we're talking about overcoming. So, all right. Well, let's go ahead and wrap this up. I loved making this with you. Thank you for joining me and taking the time to investigate this with me and explore this topic.
Oh, absolutely. We've talked about so many awesome things on this episode. It may be one of my favorites.
Yeah.
This was great. I'll be back, I'm sure. We'll talk about some more awesome things.
Yeah. We've got plenty of ideas for future episodes. So, all right. Thank you all for tuning in. Check us out next time on the Astral Hour.